both David and John Wilkes, who will be speaking momentarily, to participate today, and we had a discussion about how they might divvy up the content, and David agreed to give the background on the Institute of Archaeology, and John very kindly agreed to talk about how his impact on the Institute is just one of many major impacts that he's had on institutions around the UK and abroad. And so I'd like to introduce John Wilkes then, who will be speaking about some of that move from a researcher to administrator elsewhere. So thank you so much.
Well, David Harris has provided an account of a very full academic career, to the extent that one could barely imagine that there was time for anything else. That indeed there was time for other things, many, many other things, of which I can only speak with an almost unseemly brevity in the time I have today. When John Evans succeeded Vera Gordon Child as Professor of Prehistoric European Archaeology at the Institute of Archaeology in 1956, I doubt he will have anticipated an academic career not centred on research in Mediterranean prehistory, continuing and enlarging the scope of earlier studies, which we've heard in Spain and Malta. Yet during those years, when his attention was directed to major field projects in Crete and elsewhere, archaeology back in the United Kingdom was being transformed, or beginning to be transformed, from a minority interest and a specialist, though not yet autonomous, presence in universities. From that to a broadly based concern for the remains of the historic past, then under threat from urban development and the construction of motorways across areas of the historic countryside. By the late 1960s, an era of protest in so many forms, the cause of rescue archaeology attracted wide support in a demand that the threat to the archaeological heritage be countered by publicly funded excavation in advance of development, and even, if justified, meeting the cost of preserving historic remains. It is then unlikely that during those years, focused on the Mediterranean, John Evans could have foreseen the major role he was destined to play in the establishment of archaeology in all its forms, both as a major university discipline and as a publicly funded process prior to major construction projects, and notably in the period when he was director of the Institute from 1973 until retirement in 1989. In seeking to meet the public demand for state-funded rescue archaeology, the Ancient Monuments Division of the Ministry of Public Building and Works, later Department of the Environment, sought the judgment of senior academic figures on the priorities for allocating, which it will come as no surprise, the minimal funds extracted for this purpose from the Treasury. By 1974, a series of area advisory committees had been created under the oversight of a National Rescue Board that functioned in parallel with the long-established statutory Ancient Monuments Board. John was to play a major role as chairman and member of several of these committees and boards, more often than not in the role of mediator and conciliator in the occasionally abrasive interface between the demands of the nascent units of professional archaeologists and officials striving to uphold a departmental brief. John also played an important role in the preparation of the Ancient Monuments Act, incorporating broader definitions of what might qualify for statutory protection. This, a not entirely satisfactory enactment, was destined to pass as non-controversial prior to the 1979 election. But following that, a new policy ended the existence of all the advisory committees in what was called the bonfire of the Quangos. As director of the Institute, John Evans initiated a mutually beneficial relationship with the world of professional field archaeology by a long-standing association with the Sussex Archaeological Field Unit. The latter's Peter Druitt was appointed to a part-time post with responsibility for organising the field training courses required, as John firmly believed, for the expanding undergraduate community and institute of which David Harris has spoken. The unit on its side could draw on the Institute for academic support and specialist advice in meeting the needs of rescue, excavation and field survey involving almost every phase from the Paleolithic to the late medieval. In the year of his appointment as Institute Director, John was elected to the British Academy. The legacy of Mortimer Wheeler's years as Secretary of the Academy during the 1950s was a major role in the allocation of public funds to support British schools, institutes and sponsored societies abroad, engaged for the greater part in field archaeology. These included the long-established Roman Athens schools, along with more recent creations, some initiated by Wheeler, including Iraq, Iran, Jerusalem, Amman, East Africa and Afghanistan, along with societies' long-standing engagements in Egypt, Libya, South and Southeast Asia. Within the Academy, some felt this a lopsided inherited area of inherited sponsorship to the detriment of other major cultures. During his term as chairman of the Academy Schools and Institutes Committee, John Evans sought to make members of the Academy aware of the value of these overseas institutions, and in this he was well supported by external members of the committee drawn from the British Council, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the business world. Moreover, it will have been a great source of pride that today his successor in that role of chairmanship is one who was an undergraduate pupil at the Institute during his directorship. In this brief tribute, I've chosen to speak of two areas in which John Evans rendered outstanding service to archaeology beyond the doors of the Institute, rather than simply to rehearse the large number of organisations, national and international, to which he contributed his time and judgment, not infrequently in the role of president or chairman. In all these, he was firm in principle, but conciliatory in manner. These personal qualities were displayed in the unhappy affair of the Congress of the International Union of Prehistoric and Protohistoric Sciences, due to be held in London in 1986. Then, a division within the British National Committee over disinviting participants from South Africa and Namibia gave rise to a breach with the International Union. Having been the principal link between the two, as chairman of the British National Committee and president of the International Union, John Evans decided that resignation from the former was his only course. In the event, the World Archaeology Congress, held at Southampton in that year, was a success. As a London colleague for 15 years, I can recall the countless occasions when he gave time to welcoming visitors from many countries to his ground floor office in Gordon Square. More often than not, he was by this rendering a service in fostering academic and cultural relations worldwide, at the request of and to the benefit of several institutions, including the British Council, the European Union, and the British Academy. Then, often after a morning taken up with receiving visitors, he would frequently have to depart for a meeting elsewhere in the university or in London that he judged his duty to attend. More often than not, the warmth of John's welcome made such reception of foreign visitors a great success and yielded contacts of lasting value. I do, however, recall one occasion when a magnificent piece of worked flint on display for the occasion was mistaken by a visiting government minister as an official gift, and its recovery, when it was on the point of being placed in the official limousine, proved a test even for John's diplomatic skills. I'd like to end on a personal note. From my perspective, as a student of ancient Rome, I recall John Evans as an embodiment of virtus. That is, one who devotes their energies to benefit the community to which they belong and strives for the good of those they serve when holding office, yet without seeking gloria or personal ambition, never displaying superbia or arrogance, and never motivated by invidia or malice.
things I've learned today is about personal stories, or the personal stories of John's life. I don't recall ever meeting him personally, though we must have passed on the stairs and in the library upstairs here, all of us who've used the great resources here for some decades will have done. But what has struck me as somebody rather like John in the 80s, still with a full-time job, but having all those things coming at you that you sit on, that you chair, that you organise, how hard he must have worked to keep all that, juggling all those balls at once. Some things change, some things remain the same. We seem either to be facing times of cuts, or sometimes alongside times of cuts, times when the institutions we work for and the ways we work have to be reorganised for some reason, administratively or whatever. So we're giving things different names, moving pots of money around from one place to the other. So I can well relate to all the things that John coped with, particularly in those 70s and 80s, in the various jobs he did. A great deal of expertise, obviously, in his scholarship, but also what I heard, not only in terms of dealing with the people of past times and keeping their histories in the picture as the raw material of archaeology is discovered and analysed, but the people around him, keeping people in the picture, keeping the academic objectives of what we're all doing in the picture whilst we struggle with the administrative and other burdens that we have. He clearly was a tremendous example to not just everybody in this room, but many hundreds of other people, students and professionals throughout his world. And so it's with great admiration we have this as one of, I'm sure, many goodbyes to him over these few years. And we will remember him, as Martin mentioned today, because not only for the great service he gave this society, but in the legacy that he left us, which will support the work of students to come. One's always reminded, of course, that we stay alive as long as the people who remember us are alive and talk about us. The other way we can do it, of course, is by the way in which we can encourage scholarship in the future, so people will read our books and, if it's possible for us to do that, benefit a bit from the legacies and resources we leave them to continue their work. So as I invite you to drinks in the hall, in a final round of applause, our thanks to Sara for organising this today and all the staff at the Antiquaries for the way in which they facilitated what she wished to do, and in our applause to one way of remembering John and his great achievements. And thank you all very much.